Okay, hello everyone, and finally in this video I'm going to go through how to answer an intoxication defence question, but more specifically aimed at specific intent offences, which I explained in my previous video. So also check out, if you haven't already, my video on how to answer an intoxication defence question, which is looking at basic intent offences. Now, I've done a scenario here. It's not one that AQA's provided or anything, just to give us something to work with. Advise James whether the defence of intoxication will succeed for the murder of Tracy. So James is married to Tracy but is having an affair with his work colleague Becky. James wants to leave Tracy but feels unable to do so as he fears that she will ruin him once she discovers the affair. James also signed a prenuptial agreement stating that if he has an affair while married to, I should say Tracy, shouldn't I? There we are. Just fix that. He forfeits any rights to her estate. Becky decides that they will have to kill Tracy and make it look like she was attacked by an intruder at home, which James reluctantly agrees to if they are to be together. James buys a crowbar and a bottle of whiskey, consuming most of the bottle during the course of the day to give him the courage to kill her. James falls asleep on Becky's sofa and wakes up hours later in the early hours of the next morning. Driving to his house, he creeps upstairs to the bedroom and finds Tracy asleep before bludgeoning her to death with the crowbar. He then makes it look like a break-in by an intruder, but is later arrested by the police. So, how do we approach this? As before, and in my previous video, I'll link below, you've got the flowchart diagram, I think, which is really useful to use. My simplified version of it is here. So first of all, we start with, was, in this case, James, the defendant, intoxicated? So the examiner will leave clues, quite obvious ones. So have our highlighter pen ready. And I've got here, the bottle of whiskey. Let's put this in yellow. Consuming most of the bottle during the course of the day. So immediately, that answers our first part, which would be yes, alcohol, whiskey. So that's my plan that I'm doing. Next question for us following that flowchart is, was this intoxication done by James voluntarily, of his own free will, or involuntarily? And I think it goes on to say here, he did this to give him the courage to kill her, which is why he buys all of this. So actually all of this sentence is relevant. James buys a crowbar and a bottle of whiskey, consuming most of the bottle to give him the courage to kill her. Clearly then, this is voluntary. And then for intoxication defence questions, what we typically have to do is we have to identify whether the offence is one of specific intent or basic. Now, as this I've done as a 10 marker, it's quite clearly specific. My previous video did explain this. For a 30 marks question, again, as a reminder, it will not explicitly, the question asks you to look for defences in a 30 marker, but you must do that and explain and apply. 10 markers, though, like we're dealing with today, tell us exactly what the topic is, namely the intoxication defence down here, and the fact that we're dealing with murder. So, the previous video is intoxication defence, capacity defence is not a complete defence for public policy reasons. Specific intent offences are those crimes where we can categorise it by its mens rea as being only being able to commit the crime intentionally. So intent-only crimes such as murder, such as Section 18 GBH, and theft, more commonly ones we would have studied. Clearly this question is murder, so already we're into specific intent. And that means that the position can be that it falls back to a lesser basic intent offence. So if the defendant is intoxicated voluntarily and commits this basic intent offence, commits this specific intent offence, that it will fall back to a lesser basic one. So murder would be perhaps to unlawful act manslaughter. Section 18 GBH would be to Section 20 GBH, or wounding, and so on and so forth. Be careful, as I said in my earlier video, if it is theft, there is no offence to fall back to, no lesser one. Now, that's supported by the case of Lippmann. But the key thing here is, and also looking at that diagram, at any point where the defendant has shown they have developed the mens rea, that they have criminal intent for that offence, then it doesn't really matter. The defence just won't work at all for a specific. And this is what we have here. What we have here is James buying this bottle of whiskey and the crowbar in order to essentially kill his wife. So he's drinking this to develop courage. And that should be sparking off clues from what you've studied before in your mind that is a very similar case to one called Attorney General's Reference for Northern Ireland and Gallagher. And in the Gallagher case, very similarly, with a situation where the defendant, who was institutionalized, I think blamed his wife. Upon his release, he bought some bottle of whiskey and a knife, and he consumed that whiskey knowing that it would make him more aggressive, because it would interfere, I think, with his sort of, it would rile up his psychosis, if you see what I mean, and that he would more easily be able to kill his wife, which he did. Now, I've written out an answer below here following the plan, and I just want to go through it with you. Okay, so what we're doing when structuring this is, here's our plan, remember, our flowchart diagram. We've got to cover these points. So, was James intoxicated? As you know, with this type of defence, we can work out from the type of offence early on whether it will succeed or not, and it won't succeed, this defence, for the reasons I'm going into. So, opening sentence: James will not be able to use the defence of intoxication, which is a common law defence. Then we go into the first part: is he intoxicated? Well, the defendant must be intoxicated by alcohol, drugs or solvents. James was intoxicated by alcohol when he bought a bottle of whiskey and consumed most of it during the course of the day. So that is this part done. Then the next part, voluntarily or involuntarily, and I go on to say this was done voluntarily by James. In other words, he chose to consume the alcohol of his own free will. And then this is the key bit, as I said, linking to the case. He did this so as to give himself Dutch courage, as the courts coined it, to give him the courage to commit the murder of his wife Tracy. This is similar to the case of Attorney General's Reference for Northern Ireland v Gallagher. Now, usually I would not expect us to discuss the facts of a case, but because they are so similar to the point that we're trying to apply and reach a conclusion on here in the scenario, then I think if you want top marks, that is what you should do and what AQA expects as an exam board. So I went on, where the defendant bought a knife and bottle of whiskey and consumed the alcohol as he knew it would make him aggressive and more easily able to kill his wife. The Court of Appeal held the defendant to be guilty as they had shown the mens rea for the offence and criminal intent when consuming the alcohol. Consequently, it's unlikely that James can use the defence of intoxication either. So we've taken that point of law, we've made the link, and we've applied and reached a conclusion. But we carry on. We define what a specific intent offence is, as I mentioned earlier, one where the mens rea can only be intent, and then we go on to say, in this instance, because we're dealing with murder, what murder is, and the bit we're really interested in is the malice aforethought express or implied bit. So that's the mens rea, intent to kill or intent to cause GBH. As the mens rea is intent only, murder is a specific intent offence, so I've made that link. This could result in a partial defence whereby it falls back to a lesser basic intent offence and lesser sentence, according to the case of Lippmann. I'm not going to explain the facts of that case for this, because I think the key case really is the Gallagher one. However, and then we're going back to that point, as James has shown criminal intent, he will not be able to use the defence successfully, and that is the end of my answer. What I would say is, just generally as well, sometimes they might put in a problem scenario that there's the passage of time, and I put here that James falls asleep on Becky's sofa and wakes up hours later. So again, that might be an indication that, you know, the effects of alcohol, because what you're basically saying with this defence is you as a defendant lack the capacity to have formed the mens rea because you're so intoxicated. But, for instance, alcohol, drugs, whatever, but in this case alcohol, as time passes, indeed hours and whatnot, the effects of that intoxication can wear off. So I think actually that's an indication as well that he's kind of formed the criminal intent, hasn't he? So maybe my answer could have also mentioned the fact that furthermore, as you know, arguably the effects of the alcohol has worn off. At the time he committed the murder of Tracy, he would have had the mens rea. I could probably have put something in my answer alongside that. But the key bit I wanted is the Dutch courage part, which is why he bought the whiskey in the first place. But do look out for that in problem scenarios. And then very briefly, again, IDEA, a mnemonic that is useful when answering problem scenario questions. And I just like to highlight it. So for me, this is how I do it. James will not be able to use the defence of intoxication. That is yellow. We're identifying the person and the topic, the law, in this case, intoxication defence. Defined for me is when I go and say is it statutory or common law. So in this case, it is as such. I know some people like to then go and explain the sort of the offence or whatever it might be, or the defence, but for me, I do that in the E part. So let's have a look. The defendant must be intoxicated by alcohol, drugs or solvents. That is me explaining the position with the law, so that goes in green. That is a comma, I think. We'll put that in there. Well, James was intoxicated by alcohol when he bought it, consumed most of it during the course of the day. That is me applying it to the scenario, showing from the scenario above what I've managed to pull out of it as supporting evidence. This was done voluntarily by James. In other words, he chose to consume it of his own free will. I guess that still applies, isn't it? He did this so as to give himself Dutch courage to commit the murder of his wife Tracy. Again, let's put that into the application part, because we're referring to the names of the people. This is similar to the case of Attorney General Ref for Northern Ireland and Gallagher, and then I give the case facts, and then I said the Court of Appeal held that there is no defence in that situation. That's me explaining the law, isn't it? Explaining that case. Then I go back to apply. Consequently, it's unlikely that James will be able to use the defence. So that goes back into purple. A specific intent offence is one where mens rea can be only committed intentionally. So again, what am I doing? I'm explaining the law. That's in green. I go on to then to explain murder. And reach the conclusion that it's a specific intent offence only. That's all green, isn't it? This could result in a partial defence where it falls back to a lesser sentence. Lesser basic intent offence, still green, isn't it? Then finally, however, as James, I'm starting to use the name again, and I'm showing finally that it's just not going to work for him, and that is my application. So that's the pink, AO2 for AQA law, assessment objective 2 application. The green is essentially assessment objective 1, knowledge and understanding. And I guess in between that, when I'm explaining myself, would be the assessment objective 3 analysis part largely in this. Yeah, I think that's the end of my answer. I hope you found this useful, and you can download this if you want from the link below.